Welcome to Facing Future TV. I'm Raya Salter. According to a new study released this week, climate change is causing widespread and irreversible impacts. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, has found that up to 3.6 billion people live in areas highly vulnerable to climate change, and there are limits to what we can do to adapt. This is what the UN Secretary General is calling an atlas for human suffering. With us to discuss this alarming new report is Dr. Deborah Lay, a lead author of the IPCC report, a climate change specialist, and an officer with the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. She's joining us today from Guatemala. Welcome, Dr. Lay.
Well, thank you very much, Raya, for this invitation. Thank you for the audience who is listening, and thank you for the interest in this report.
Yes, this is an incredibly alarming new report. And I understand the most detailed report on the impacts of global warming that we've seen to date. What does this report tell us about how the climate crisis is impacting us now? Is it much worse than we thought?
Well, what the report says is that the impacts that we are seeing now will continue to worsen as global warming levels continue to increase. So the impacts we are seeing now, we can expect to continue seeing them in the coming years. And in August, we had the Working Group 1 report on the physical science basis of climate change, which had also indicated that the climate impacts we've seen, most of them can be attributed to climate change.
All right.
Caused by human actions. Yes. So basically what we can say when you combine the results of Working Group 1 and Working Group 2 is that the impacts we are facing now have a direct relationship with human action.
All right. So I understand that in 2019 alone, more than 13 million people were displaced in Asia and Africa, and that roughly half of the world's population suffers water scarcity for at least part of the year. So help us understand, we're at about a 1.1% increase in global temperatures now, and we need to avoid 1.5 degrees. How much time do we have to act?
So the question can be divided in several parts. One of them is, of course, dealing with emissions reduction, and that will come out in a month. The IPCC's Working Group 3 report on mitigation comes out in a month, and they will have a more detailed assessment on emissions. But on the side of adaptation, as you have already clearly indicated, different impacts like the drought that many people are already facing, we have a suite of adaptation options that are feasible in the short term, which is from now until we reach 1.5 degrees C. The SPM figure 4 has a feasibility assessment of these options across 6 dimensions. So for example, what are the economics of implementing an option? What is the cost effectiveness? Or the technologies, are they mature? Are they easily available? Or social cultural issues? What do they tell us about intergenerational equity and gender equity? So we can look at how these different adaptation options can be implemented, and the different regional and sectoral chapters also point us in some cases to their effectiveness. But something that is very clear is that those options are feasible now, but in 5 years or in 10 years, they might not be, because as you said in the beginning, we might reach limits. And limits means that an ecosystem can suffer irreversible changes for which no adaptation measure can work.
So what I'm hearing you say that this report is sending a very sharp warning. If temperatures keep rising, there's not much we'll be able to do to fight these impacts, and it will cause human dislocation on a global scale. Can you help us understand more about these hard limits that we can't escape. How does the report come to this conclusion?
So hard limits, if you look at figure 3 on the burning embers, you can see how there are these vertical bars that show different types of ecosystems. For example, warm water coral reefs or mangroves. And when you look at the colors of the bars, white means that there's no visible impact. Yellow, that there is some impact that is reversible, for which adaptation options exist. Red is that there are many impacts, and if temperatures stop increasing, adaptation options might still be able to work. And purple, which is the top part of it, means that we've already hit irreversible changes. So if you look at this figure 3, you can see that in some regions, some ecosystems have already reached a point of irreversibility between 1 and 1.5. I think the most common example of irreversibility is coral reefs. We won't be able to recuperate 100% of the coral reefs that have been lost. But there are other systems like the Arctic, the melting of glaciers, some coastal fisheries, populations that live in coastal areas that depend on artisanal fishing or mangroves. Some of those, depending on the location, are reaching the point where, a couple more degrees and decimals of degrees, and we won't be able to apply adaptation measures, which is why it is so important to apply these adaptation measures. We have the opportunity right now to do it and to save lives and to save ecosystems.
So we are already past the point of no return for some of our most precious ecosystems. You talked before about these different indicators: intergenerational equity and adaptation, gender and adaptation. Could you tell us more about what is happening there, and are we at the point of no return on those issues as well?
No, not of no return. So what we looked at for every single adaptation option, and this is an extension of the work done in the special report of global warming at 1.5 degrees C, is the multidimensional feasibility assessment breaks down the assessment of each option in 6 dimensions and 19 indicators. We don't have sufficient evidence for all of the indicators. I mean, in some cases, monitoring and evaluation is not done. In some cases, it's done looking at, specific features, for example, economics or technology. We're trying to gather more information, more evidence on the part of social cultural dimensions. But what is clear, what we are seeing now, is that gender plays a huge role. You always see the statement that women and children are more vulnerable, and that equity plays an important role in how we shape our future pathways. So these are areas in which definitely more evidence is needed, but what we are seeing is that when there is no gender equity or no intergenerational equity, then the feasibility of the option is lower, and the effectiveness can also be lower.
So what I'm hearing is that we still have time, but if we don't impact and focus on women and children and intergenerational equity, we will be less effective in our ability to counter these impacts or adapt.
Yes, that is correct. And I think that's one of the core messages of the report. Moving on to figure 5 on climate resilient development pathways, that actually is underpinned by justice, by equity, by bringing those most vulnerable to the table, to give them a voice, to include the most marginalized populations, of how we can include indigenous populations and their knowledge. How can we use that? One of the things that you'll see in figure 5, for example, is that to start with, to achieve climate resilient development, we are talking about integrating mitigation options that reduce emissions with adaptation options that reduce risks, to achieve sustainable development. And although we mentioned sustainable development goals specifically, we want to make clear that this also goes beyond 2030.
Got it.
But
So
sorry, go ahead.
no, so while justice and fundamental fairness are clearly a part of this picture, it's also, I'm hearing, an imperative that we focus on Indigenous stewardship and other techniques that prioritize the most vulnerable.
Yes. So as you can see, for example, in panel A of this figure, we have what we call arenas of engagement, which are spaces in which civil society, in which people, all of us citizens in this world can engage, whether it be political arenas, environmental arenas, whether it's in a town hall with your elected government officials, or whether it's in a protected area fighting for the rights of the populations living there, or just to protect nature because of a certain species, for example. Those are the areas in which we can all participate. And what we highlight in panel A is that societal choices are the drivers of how these pathways are chosen. So it's not just up to governments. When we say that governmental policies don't work, it's that civil society, all of us have a role. Like, for example, the role you have in disseminating this information and in translating scientific terms into, like guiding me how to break down this conversation so it's more understandable. So what you see in panel A is how these societal choices function to determine which pathways we're going to choose. So in panel B, you can see the different pathways. And then in panel C, you have two illustrative outcomes, one in which you have equity and justice and environmental stewardship, which is what we all aim to. And I think besides the part of equity and justice and the arenas of engagement, there's two other really important messages tied to this, that we only have 1 decade in which to act to achieve this transformation, because otherwise it will be too late. And the other message is that actions have to keep in mind both humans and nature. We need to ensure a healthy nature to ensure the well-being of humans. So this is not just nature, in looking at nature and seeing what services we can take from them, or where it's useful to us, but just in protecting nature because of what it is. We need a healthy planet and we need healthy ecosystems in order to survive.
Tell me more about the role of ecosystems in adaptation and survival.
So thank you for this really important question. Adaptation, ecosystems give us multiple services. For example, water. If we don't protect forests, we don't have enough water sources, just as an example. Or if we don't have correct agricultural practices, then we suffer problems of food insecurity. And if you look, for example, at the wildfires that happened in California and well throughout the world in the last summers, you see that it doesn't only have a damage to the forest, but also all the wildlife that lived there, all the biodiversity and all the other services we would get from forests. You can see that after you don't have forest fires, but then comes the rainy season, and then you have these huge mudslides that you can then, the risks get compounded or multiplied when you have vulnerable populations living nearby, or populations that are already suffering from water drought, from water scarcity. So options that help, like forest-based adaptation options or efficient irrigation or some agroecology practices can help can help us use nature to adapt, while helping us as humans adapt, but also helping the ecosystem adapt. So for example, different types of forest protection and restoration also work.
So again, as we've gone beyond preserving and protecting nature because of its inherent beauty and the dignity of life to being an actual imperative. And let me ask, another big piece of this report, who are the most vulnerable? And this study draws that scientific connection from global warming to extreme weather and other impacts much more directly than we've understood it before. So who is it that is the most vulnerable, and how can we tell?
Well, vulnerability is the people most vulnerable. I know we've always heard, and I said before about women and children, elderly, but there's also people living in poverty, people living, for example, in unsafe conditions, like in informal settlements or rural areas that lack basic services, that don't have radio communication systems, that, you know, can't access um, weather information or data or other type of climate services. Those are the people most at risk, people living in isolated, precarious conditions.
Are there also um, regional, intensities of impact? We understand that the global South is going to experience climate crisis first and worst. What does that report tell us about that regional vulnerability?
Well, I think in terms of regional vulnerability, definitely island nations and coastal areas are one of the most vulnerable. But also we see areas in Africa, South Asia, Central America, parts of parts of North America, areas where there's a lot of poverty, for example, also create a lot of vulnerability.
So one theme here is that it brings validity, or at least some hard evidence, to this concept of loss and damage, where many nations in the global South have been pushing global elites in the wealthier countries to do more to compensate them for that irreversible loss and harm they will experience. What how can this report inform this concept of loss, disproportionate and irreversible loss and damage?
Yeah, so in the summary for policymakers, you can read about that in section C3, but what we're basically saying is that loss and damage is more than just impacts. It's systems or knowledge that are, or, like in some cases, cultures that we can't get back. Like, when we talk about limits, when you reach a hard limit, you have a loss. Like with the coral reefs. With part of different, when people have to evacuate and migrate and you're leaving your culture and your history behind, that's a loss. And losses and damages are not always economic. And that's something that we also need to keep in mind. You can't always quantify monetarily, because some are, how do you put a price on losing an ecosystem or all the species extinct? Like when you lose a species, and especially now when we're talking about losing a species due to climate change, so we also need to keep in mind that there are non-economic losses.
There is no price to put on something so precious as ecosystems and biodiversity and life itself. Help me understand how is it that the science can draw ties between what's happening in the atmosphere and what's happening on the ground, any particular tornado or particular event?
So that's a science called attribution, in which different models are run. That's more of working group 1. So I don't run those models. I couldn't explain more of that, but for those interested, you can look at attribution studies, in which you take an event and they basically do modeling of how this event would look like without human interference.
Okay. Is it fair to say that this study has used the most sort of up-to-date attribution, and thus is the sort of latest science on how we can understand attribution in a more direct way?
Yes, so working group one was like the most recent up-to-date study on the science of it. And working group two results also take into account working group one findings.
Got it.
So like in the different projections we do, like in the Burning Embers figure 3 of the summary for policymakers, you can see those are also results that took in working group one findings.
Got it. In this analysis, in this situation, are there any nations or peoples that are spared from the climate crisis?
No, each region will be impacted. Yeah, each
He
region
gave
will
me
be
his shoes
impacted.
like, no. No, sis, no.
Sorry for
Sorry, please
being so
continue.
stark, but no, I mean, every country, even, when you talk about global north, for example, you can see in the United States, different countries of Europe, the levels of devastation that there are because of wildfires, because of floods. So yeah, sadly, no. Which is why it's even more important to stress that we have this small window of opportunity to act and we can't lose time.
This was another conclusion from this report, is that we're simply not doing enough. We're failing to act on climate. And as the Secretary General said, we are getting clobbered by climate change.
Yes. Yes, and I think right now we can say that the window of opportunity for implementing adaptation options will close as long as global warming levels keep increasing. So it again emphasizes the point of where mitigation and adaptation need to come together. But yeah, one other thing, when we talk about even implementing adaptation, that we can't just do more of what we've been doing. So there's clearly an adaptation gap between the adaptation needs and what we have on the ground, and of course on financing, the most of which is going to emissions reductions projects. But also that we can't keep doing adaptation as we currently do it. In some cases, we need to help change the attributes of a system. So for example, there are some examples of communities that used to, their main income, their livelihood source was on agriculture. Now their land is not, is not able to sustain crops. And some of them have changed to either growing flowers or ecotourism to show to show people the devastation of climate change. And that is more what we call transformational. Because it makes people change their way of life. It's like you have to train again. You have to study new things, learn new things. It's not the same of selling, whether it be rice or corn to flowers, or even ecotourism and how you deal with tourists. So those are the types of changes that we will need to see more in the coming years. The other major transformation that the report also points out in trying to achieve climate resilient development pathways is what we call system transitions. So we cannot work in sectors anymore as we've been doing. And this is a concept that came out of the Special Report on Global Warming at 1.5. But basically, when we work at a systems level, we can better integrate mitigation and adaptation options. We can better take advantage of the synergies and reduce the trade-offs, because we all know that there are mitigation options that increase vulnerability, but there are also adaptation options that can increase emissions. So where do we come with that balance to ensure no one is left behind, to ensure we're not exacerbating poverty, to ensure that everybody's heard, to ensure that we have equity, that we're not endangering food security, for example.
Yeah, what does it mean to work on on a systems level on these transitions? What does it mean? What does the report recommend?
So, for example, we have the biggest system transition right now is on land, oceans, and ecosystems, basically bringing together food, water, forest, oceans, coastal areas. Recognizing that whatever action you take in a forest can impact agriculture or vice versa. Actions that you take to for agriculture can impact forests, can impact the water supply, but that same water supply can impact cities or rural settlements and can impact the way we use or generate energy. So what we need to see now is that there is an interconnectedness with everything.
That's so what is this idea of maladaptation? I heard you speak to there are things that we can do as we're trying to adapt with short-term thinking, but could actually make things worse. What is this idea of maladaptation and why is it such a problem?
Well, maladaptation happens sometimes because we aren't planning correctly, because we don't take everybody into consideration, everybody of the population that's at risk, because we don't have enough funding, because we, in some cases, we have found that there are sustainable development or poverty alleviation projects that are mislabeled as adaptation. And while they can reduce poverty to some segment of the population, they don't reduce vulnerability in general. And that's a problem. And I think one of the examples that we listed, for example, of seawalls in coastal areas, how, if properly done, it can reduce vulnerability, but in some cases they can actually hurt nature's that seawalls can work against nature's own ability, and that in some cases it has gone to maladaptation. Sometimes, for example, not taking into consideration indigenous populations and indigenous knowledge. So that's something we need to be aware of.
Can technology get us out of this problem?
Not always. I think technology is an enabler. I think technology helps, and we need to know how to use it. I mean, technology, especially when we talk, for example, about climate services and how climate information is shared. And yes, there are some technologies that can help us, but technologies alone can't do the job, because together, now that I'm talking about enablers, you brought out a really important point, that we have all this, the suite of adaptation options, but they can be effective and they can be feasible. But for example, if we don't have technology, if we don't have robust institutions, if we don't have strong governance structures, if we don't have appropriate knowledge systems and monitoring and evaluation, then they won't be as effective or as feasible.
That's incredibly helpful. Am I correct that a lot of these 3.6 billion people the report talks about who are really under threat are in cities? And what is the role of cities in this solution?
Well, cities play a really important role because it is as predicted that almost 70% of the global population will be living in cities in the next coming years. So cities play an important role. And I think that, the report states that adaptation options within cities are important, of how to include, for example, green infrastructure, of how you can bring in more of nature, of greening areas, how to deal with the heat island effect, how to ensure you have, resilient infrastructure, not just in buildings or roads, but like energy, how to keep your energy systems working, and telecommunication systems. So it is very important for urban settings, for cities, for informal settlements, and also for rural populations.
So this is interesting as well, because as I understand, we have this really short window to act, and it's so important on many levels, because as you mentioned, for instance, we need to address urban heat islands and have green infrastructures and trees. And if we don't act, impacts could actually accelerate to that near-term action not being effective. So tell me more about this window and what should we be doing?
Well, the window is, as I said, we need to start acting in the next decade. These transformations of not working in sectors, but by system transition, we need to start doing that. We need to start looking at how mitigation actions can increase or decrease vulnerability. That the sole objective is not reduce emissions, or like obviously in adaptation case, reduce vulnerability, but keeping ensure that, the most vulnerable people are heard and the most marginalized. There's also other adaptation options that can help the most vulnerable populations, like social safety nets, public work programs, cash transfers, public health systems. I think the report right now for the first time mentions mental health, that needs that have to be addressed with each extreme weather event. So it's not working on each option in isolation. And I think that the main message of the special report of 1.5, saying that there isn't one single option that will get us to our goal, that's really amplified here, and that you can't use these options in isolation. For example, disaster risk management and climate services, early warning systems can help enhance other adaptation options, whether in energy sector or in agriculture. And these other options of social safety nets also work throughout, like having health systems.
This is really important, is I'm understanding that sustainable development, just sustainable development pathways, it's not just about, we need to help people because it's the right thing to do, and those same people are going to be the first to be hit by climate crisis. It's that part of the answer in this systems transition and meeting basic needs is actually part of our climate adaptation and, I presume, mitigation answer.
Yes, absolutely. And so when we stress about the window, that it's narrowing, is if global warming levels keep increasing, the options that we have available today might not be available in 5 years or in 10 years. The world we see today will not be the same world in 10 years.
If there's one, it's not the right question given what we've been talking about, systems change. But if there was one thing or one suite of things that you should say we need to do tomorrow, we need to start doing tomorrow, what would that be?
Wow, one thing.
Maybe it's to not think about it as one thing, because maybe that would be the first thing.
Well, no, I think to read the report and to listen to this this recording. But I think that we need to realize that, civil society has a very important role. This is not just up to governments or scientists. Civil society has a very important role. And again, focusing on panel A of figure 5, on the arenas of engagement. That's the space where everybody jumps in. There are multiple places, there are multiple arenas, and we have a range of actors. We are all actors in this.
Dr. Ley, that ending with that, because I can be, I think, very overwhelming to folks to hear this information and to realize that we really are the answer. And the first thing that we can do is get aware, I think is very empowering and makes me feel optimistic, as much as we have such a short window. Thank you.
There is a ray of hope. There is a ray of hope. We have the decade.
Ray of hope. We have the decade and we have to act now. Thank you so very much for joining us. And thank you for joining us with Facing Future TV.